Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar on the topic of the next generation of project management that is going to be brought to you by Harold Kerzner and International Institute for Learning. And now, without any further ado, over to you.
Thank you, Pavel. I'm Harold Kerzner with the International Institute for Learning. I've been with them for more than 30 years, and I want to give you a brief introduction as to what the next generation of project management might look like. There are several factors that have caused the next generation to appear so quickly. Some of the factors I've listed here. First, project management is now a strategic competency. It's no longer just a career path, it's a strategic career path. Project management is now being applied to new types of projects, especially projects related to strategic planning, innovation, and R&D. There's been a growth in flexible methodologies. These bullets that I just mentioned have required new project management skills. And one of the most significant reasons why the next generation is coming so quickly is because of COVID and the VUCA environment. We are now experiencing significant volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity in our projects, especially strategic projects and those requiring innovation. So let's talk first about the impact that COVID has had on project management. What has been the impact? First of all, we're now teaching project managers how to manage crisis projects. These are projects that they've never had to manage before. These are projects that are the result of increased employee stress. We need better ways of communicating with people since they're now working from home. We need new ways of making project decisions. We have to make decisions rapidly. We can't adopt a wait and see attitude like we have in the past. And we have to make decisions based upon imperfect or incomplete information. These are just some of the things that have been created by COVID that have changed how we look at project management. One of the most significant changes that's occurring is project managers now have to learn how to solve problems and make decisions. You know, historically, we managed traditional projects that started out with well-defined requirements, a business case, a statement of work. We taught you all this, but how do you manage projects that start out with just an idea? Strategic projects that start out with just an idea and the scope evolves as the project progresses. How do you solve problems in those types of projects? How do you make decisions? IIL is now co-authoring with John Wiley Publishers for a brand new book called Project-Based Problem Solving and Decision Making that talks about how we identify problems and make decisions in a project management environment. And the next several slides, that's material that I've taken out of the book, which I helped write, and you'll see some of this information. First, project managers are no longer managing strictly operational projects. We're now managing strategic projects, and strategic projects have a much longer time frame than traditional projects. Because of the longer time frame, there's a greater risk that environmental changes will take place that will impact the way we do the project. If you're a project manager today, you're no longer managing a project. Let me repeat that. Project managers today are no longer managing projects, they're managing part of a business. You have become a business manager, and we're expecting you to make business decisions as well as project-based decisions. Businesses today are much more complex and the decisions are much more challenging. As a project manager managing the new types of projects, we expect you to identify opportunities for the company rather than saying, I'm just going to follow the statement of work and that's it. If during the implementation of the project you see opportunities, we expect you to bring it to management. Let them see the opportunities that you've discovered. This is new for a lot of project managers. We've had advances in technology that will make it easier for us to solve problems and make decisions. I'll show you that in a little while. Problem solving and decision making is now becoming a core competency. IIL will be developing training programs in this shortly. We never taught this as part of project management training over the past 50 years. We didn't teach you problem solving and decision making. We assumed you knew about that. We taught you other skills. Now we're realizing these are critical skills. New types of projects require more time to understand the problem. If you have a poor definition of the problem, it's going to lead to confusion. It's going to take much longer to solve the problem, and you could end up drawing faulty conclusions. So one of the things we're trying to teach people is identify what the real problem is, not the symptoms. Don't focus on the symptoms. How many times have I heard people come over to me and say, I have a problem, I'm over budget and behind schedule? When they say that, I look at them and I say, you're telling me the symptoms, not the problem. What's the root cause of the problem? Why are you over budget and behind schedule? Over budget and behind schedule is not the problem. What are the risks? What's the complexity? And you want to be absolutely sure that the team members are people that are familiar with the problem. You may need to bring on board as part of the project team people that are not actively involved in the execution of the project, but they can contribute to problem solving and decision making. We need to collect information. And one of the things we're teaching people in webinars now is that there's primary and secondary information. Primary information is the information that you have at your fingertips as a project manager. Secondary information is the information that you must gather from other people. Usually on traditional projects, the people in the team that you work with have all of the information you need. But when you work on strategic projects, now you need strategic information. You may have to get that information from marketing, sales, customers, stakeholders, all sorts of other people may have the information that you will need. In order to make decisions, we normally taught people that the project manager and the project team develop the alternatives. That's not necessarily true today. We believe that there are people in your company that are not part of the project that could possibly contribute to identifying the problem and coming up with alternatives. Why does it have to be only the people on the project team that are brought into brainstorming sessions? So today we're willing to admit that as project managers, you should have access to all of these other people, especially when it comes to identifying problems in strategic projects. But once you identify all of these alternatives on these strategic projects, you may need the support of other people in selecting the best choice. You may have to bring on board functional managers. You most certainly will have to bring on board stakeholders. Project managers are not going to be working by themselves with just a few members on a project team, the way they did on traditional projects. On these new types of projects that involve innovation, creative thinking, brainstorming, and so on. Let's talk about the assumptions. For those of you that are familiar with managing traditional projects, at the beginning of the project, we gave you a list of assumptions and constraints. And guess what? The assumptions and constraints, you assumed that they remained the same for the duration of the project. But that's not going to happen on these strategic projects that have longer time frames. The assumptions will change over the life of the project. You might not know what all the assumptions are at the beginning of the project. And the statement of work in the business case may not identify what these assumptions are. The same thing with the constraints. They will change over the life of the project. They might not be fully known at the beginning of the project. You may be working with stakeholders that have hidden agendas. And today, we realize that there's more constraints than just time, cost, and scope. Remember, when you manage traditional projects, the only constraints we gave you were time, cost, and scope. But on these new projects that we're dealing with today, we have constraints on quality, safety, risk, ethical conduct, reputation, image. All of these are new constraints. And guess what? We have metrics to accompany these constraints. For every constraint you have, you will have a new metric. I did a lot of research over a 2-year period on brainstorming. And I read several articles that said that more than 90% of the people that conduct brainstorming sessions don't know how to do it effectively. And this got me nervous. I started talking to some of the companies that I consult for and train, and I have the same problems there. The project managers weren't sure how to effectively conduct a brainstorming session. When you work on traditional projects, you normally have a reasonably good idea what the solution is. But when you work on non-traditional projects, strategic projects, innovation, etc., brainstorming is part of the job. The problem now is, what's the right way to conduct a brainstorming session? More and more companies today are using professional facilitators, people that are professionally trained in how to conduct brainstorming sessions and get people to share information effectively. One of the things you should most certainly do, don't invite people to a meeting without sending them an agenda, telling them the reason for the meeting, and get them to think up ideas before showing up at the meeting. Don't expect people to show up at a meeting and then you, out of the blue, throw a problem at them and expect them to come up with the best possible solutions. Get them to think about it before the meeting. Tell them you want them to think out of the box as well as in the box. You want them to think differently. And what we've learned is that many times bringing on board diverse teams, people that aren't part of the project, but they still have good ideas they can contribute. Having diverse teams as part of brainstorming is most certainly beneficial. Tell people to bring supporting data. That's critical. Tell people, do not criticize ideas until we ask you to. All ideas should be freely identified without criticism, at least at the beginning of a brainstorming session. Document all ideas. And whoever's placed in charge of the brainstorming session must know how to deal with combative people, people that continuously want to run the meeting, promote their idea only, criticize everybody else's ideas. The leader of the brainstorming session must know how to deal with those people. What are some of the reasons why brainstorming fails? We don't have a trained facilitator. The attendees have never been trained in what to expect at a brainstorming session. It's new to many of them. Spending too much time trying to find the solution to a perfect problem when you're actually solving the wrong problem. Asking people to come up with an ideal solution too quickly. And failing to consider the concerns of people. Some people are afraid of submitting an idea for fear it will be discredited and criticized. You have to make people feel comfortable about expressing their ideas. You have to let people know that when they're criticized, it's constructive criticism, not personal criticism. These are some of the things we feel that you should understand as part of brainstorming sessions. What are some of the reasons why brainstorming fails? Too long of a meeting, having too large of a group and not a diverse group. They asked the former CEO of Amazon, how many people do you have in your brainstorming meetings, and how long is a brainstorming meeting at Amazon? And his answer was, the number of people that we put in there are the number of people that can eat 2 pizzas. We bring 2 pizzas to all the brainstorming meetings. The number of people, it's based upon the 2 pizzas, and when the pizzas are devoured, the brainstorming session is over. I really like that idea. Not building on ideas of others, allowing one person to dominate the discussions, and being too quick to try and find the perfect solution rather than evaluating all solutions. One of the things we learned very, very quickly as part of COVID is that brainstorming sessions can be conducted virtually. That's right, virtual brainstorming. Participants are under less pressure. We could have more of a diverse group. We can work with larger groups, and there's less wasted time. But we also discovered that there are disadvantages to brainstorming. There's less tools because people are working from home. It's difficult sharing information and documents with them. It's difficult for people to build on ideas because they're not sitting beside their colleagues. People are less likely to ask questions. You can't read their body language and the expressions on their faces. Often there's no open dialogue, and sometimes people are multitasking and playing with their cell phone while they're sitting in a brainstorming session at home. But brainstorming sessions conducted virtually are growing significantly. As a project manager, you're going to need more information. And that information is going to come from artificial intelligence. There's a significant growth in artificial intelligence. And traditionally, we gave you an earned value measurement system, and that supposedly gave you all the information you needed from time, cost, and scope to manage your projects. But now, because we're dealing with larger projects, strategic projects, innovative projects, you need more information, and you also need tools. So we've created information warehouses and business intelligence systems. Business intelligence systems include artificial intelligence and other techniques such as big data to help you make decisions. You know, for the past 50 years, most project managers focused only on the earned value measurement system. Now, you're going to have to work with artificial intelligence and the use of big data. Let me scare you for a couple of minutes. What would you say if I told you that within the next couple of years, I would expect IIL or PMI to come up with certification programs in artificial intelligence for project managers? What would you say if I told you that in the future, you must have at least one person on your project team that will be certified in artificial intelligence for project managers? This is pretty scary, but it's happening right now. There are companies right now that are designing artificial intelligence certification programs, but not necessarily for project management. You will see project management specific packages created in the future. You will need a person in the project team that understands big data and has skills that include statistical methods, computational intelligence, optimization techniques, and so on. These are the skills you need to deal with artificial intelligence. Here you see some of the benefits of artificial intelligence as it applies to projects. You're going to be able to see patterns and trends. You're going to be able to compare your project to others. You're going to be able to identify the root causes of problems, better use of what-if scenarios, better trade-offs on competing constraints, better tracking of assumptions and constraints, a better understanding of the environment, the VUCA environment, better response to out of tolerance conditions, better capacity planning. And there's more. You'll be able to make strategic rather than just operational decisions. You'll be able to make change management decisions. You'll be able to push decision making down to others in the organization when they finally understand artificial intelligence. There'll be an emphasis on long-term benefits to your company rather than short-term benefits. And there most certainly will be reduction in risks. All of this will be the result of marrying artificial intelligence to project management. You see the models in the right-hand side here? Do you know that all of these models already exist and they're being included into artificial intelligence? We have models that'll help make all of the decisions you see here in the right-hand side for you. They exist. Artificial intelligence will not go away. I am working on a paper right now for IIL, which I hope to have finished in a week or two, that talks about all of the risks in project management as a result of implementing artificial intelligence, so that once it's implemented, people will know what the risks are and what risks they have to mitigate. I'm working on that paper right now. I should have it done within a couple of weeks. One of the challenges that people have is, where will we apply artificial intelligence? I'll give you an example. I worked for a company that was dealing with chemicals, a chemical company. And every time a project was completed, the workers had to go to human resources and fill out a checklist on what they learned on their project, what chemicals they work with, what skills they learned, what tools they used. Now picture this. If you're working in that chemical company and you're placed in charge of a project, all you do is go to artificial intelligence and type in which people in the company have ever worked with this chemical before. And artificial intelligence will print out their background and what they did in the past with regard to that chemical in that project. Artificial intelligence will replace linear responsibility charts that we taught you and RASI charts that we taught you. It'll all come from artificial intelligence. But there's fears, there are risks. Some people are afraid of losing their job. They're afraid that artificial intelligence will replace them. Some people are afraid of project failure, especially if they disagree with the solution that artificial intelligence came up with. Some of the customers you work with might not be happy if you're using artificial intelligence on your projects. You may have to get their buy-in. How do you control company sensitive information that's stored in artificial intelligence? And what about legal issues? What happens if artificial intelligence makes a bad decision and results in lawsuits? How do you sue artificial intelligence and take artificial intelligence to court? This is what the legal profession is dealing with right now. So you begin to see some of the challenges that we're facing. Artificial intelligence could be the single most important change in project management over the next several years. More and more companies today are in fact implementing it. Another change that's taking place today, especially on some of these strategic projects, in the past, whenever a project failed, sometimes we kept working on it longer and longer and longer, hoping for a miracle. We want to give project managers today a criteria for when to stop working on a project as a result of success or failure. Has anybody in a governance position ever told you when you should pull the plug on a project? We're trying to get governance people now, as part of defining the requirements for a project, providing the project team with a very clear definition of what constitutes success on that project and what constitutes failure, so they'll know when to pull the plug. The criteria must be established so project teams know when to stop working on projects. This is extremely important on the new types of projects we're going to work on, the strategic projects, those that involve innovation. Telling people what constitutes success is fairly easy. It's usually explained in financial terms. Profit margins, payback period, return on investment, net present value, internal rate of return. And we now want you to know what the difference is between short-term and long-term financial success. Most project managers are taught that success is discovered when the project comes to an end. But on non-traditional strategic projects, success may be measured 2 or 3 years after the project is over by how well it's accepted in the marketplace, customer acceptance. These are new criteria for financial success that we're trying to teach project managers. There's other success criteria. Be careful not to maximize short-term profits at the expense of long-term growth. Every project you work on can have a different success criteria. There's no single method for measuring success. Every project can have a different method for measuring success. And most of the articles that are published in the literature do not differentiate between short-term and long-term success. However, they should. They really should differentiate. This is the question I asked you before. How easy or difficult is it to shut down a project that's failing? Most companies do not have a criteria for when to shut down a project. So I did research on what criteria is to shut down a project. And here you'll see what the criteria is that I discovered. Insurmountable obstacles, business or technical obstacles, inadequate know-how, product liability uncertainties, having too small of a marketplace or market share, an unacceptable dependence on certain suppliers or distributors, not willing to accept joint ventures or licensing agreements, excessive cost for the deliverables that'll make you non-competitive. The return on investment will occur too late. The competition is too stiff and not worth the risks. The product life cycle is too short. These are criteria that companies use. 2 months ago, the second edition of my book, Innovation Project Management, was released. And in that book, I identified the exit criteria that we use for when we tell people to stop working on an innovation project. These are examples of exit criteria for projects that involve a great deal of innovation. The technology is not what we use on other products. The product cannot be supported by our existing production facilities. The product cannot be sold by our existing sales force, and it's not a fit with our marketing and distribution channels. The product and the service will not be purchased by our existing customer base. So there's a very, very big push today by executives to identify at the beginning of a project what the exit criteria is when we should stop working on it. You know, the beginning of a project is normally regarded as the fuzzy front end. And for decades, the only people that were participants in the fuzzy front end of a project were executives and perhaps stakeholders. And what the executives did, they selected the project and they assigned a priority to it. Then they brought you on board as the project manager. You as the project manager were never allowed to participate in the fuzzy front end. You had no idea what that thought process was in selecting that project or assigning a priority. You didn't know what they were thinking. Today, we're recommending to executives that project managers be brought on board early during the fuzzy front end. You know, part of the problem was the way we taught project managers. We told you that a project begins when you define the requirements. The first domain area in the PMBOK guide is to identify the requirements. Well, that's nice. But in general, you talk to the executives who have done that, and they tell you what the requirements are. Now we want you to participate in the fuzzy front end. Converting failure to success. There are a lot of bad things that happen when projects fail. And perhaps the worst thing that happens is that we discover sometimes later that it's really not a true failure, that it could have been saved. Today, there's a very big push in the marketplace for trying to figure out how to save a project that's failing. And I'm going to show you what's happening in the marketplace. I saw this slide in a different format in a paper I had read. And what the slides and what the paper said is that more than 60% of certain types of projects in companies fail. And when the projects fail, companies never look at ways to salvage the project. They simply let the project manager move on to another project. What we're teaching project managers now is take a look at what happened. This is called retrospective sense making. What happened? What actually caused the failure? And when we talk about what caused the failure, we're saying, look at the critical success factors. Was the failure because of poor expectations, poor assumptions, poor alignment to strategic objectives, poor risk management practices, poor methodology, poor governance? If I can identify the root cause of the failure, maybe I can now change the critical success factors and revisit the project and make it a success. This is what we're now stating. Not all failures are true failures. Maybe we had the wrong metrics at the beginning of the project. Today, Agile and Scrum have been tremendous to work with in a great many companies. But we're just beginning to learn that Agile and Scrum allows the acceptance of more metrics. We expect the success rate on projects to be significantly increased because of Agile and Scrum. My belief is it's going to be the fact that we're now putting in more metrics with Agile and Scrum than we used with traditional project management. In traditional project management, we focused heavily on just time, cost, and scope. With Agile and Scrum, we're tracking assumptions and whether or not they've changed. We're tracking whether or not the enterprise environmental factors have changed. Remember, you're now working on long-term projects. Change will happen. How many scope changes occurred on your project? Did the scope changes result in baseline revisions? These are some of the issues we're now significantly concerned with, and we have metrics for these, new metrics that we're looking at, that we're now teaching in our seminars at IIL. Better ways of tracking projects. There's a big growth in the marketplace today for what we call crisis dashboards. Let me explain what's meant by a crisis dashboard and why it's needed and what information is contained in it. I mentioned to you at the beginning of this session that we are going to start working on significantly more projects than we have in the past. We're going to work on projects that involve innovation, strategic planning, brainstorming, R&D. Add all these projects together, Executives cannot act as sponsors on all of these projects. It's impossible. There's too many projects. So what we're doing now are creating crisis dashboards for executives. You're an executive, you show up at work, and the first thing you do is turn on your computer and log into the crisis dashboard. The crisis dashboard is updated daily, and it will show you which metrics on which projects are in a crisis position and need attention. The crisis dashboard will show you what metrics have to be addressed and where you should participate. Let me give you an example. Let's assume you've got a budget on a project of $1 million, and you decide that it's acceptable to fall within plus or minus 10% of that $1 million. But what happens if the metric says that you'll be over budget by more than 10%? That means you should probably look at that project and contact the project team. Crisis dashboards will become more common in the future for helping senior managers and stakeholders identify which projects need their attention. The last area before I open it up for questions will be the growth of cooperative cultures. I read a paper last December in a newsletter by a company called IdeaScale, where they talked about almost 48 million Americans that left their jobs in 2021. And what they said is that the new trend in the marketplace is quiet quitting. People looking for new positions in other companies while they're still working in their company. And the reason is because they don't like the culture in the company they're working for. The working environment isn't satisfying their needs. For decades, people worked solely for the paycheck. Now people are saying, wait a minute, it's the working conditions that are equally important to me. New projects and new challenges in project management are providing people with opportunities they never had before. New types of projects are intriguing people. People want a chance to show that they're innovative, they're creative. These new projects are satisfying that. People want to work with new methodologies rather than rigid policies and procedures. Agile and Scrum is satisfying that need. People want to recommend scope changes if they feel their idea has merit. What I'm trying to tell you is that last box on the right is critical. As project managers, you must demonstrate a much greater concern for the needs and expectations of the workforce than you ever have in the past. When I was a project manager, my job was to remove those people from my project as quickly as possible. I never looked at their personal needs or expectations. Now we're telling project managers, you should do that because we want to retain the people in the company. People want to work in a company where there's a culture that understands that their ideas have value, and they want to feel that it's safe to express their ideas and take risks. That's what people want. They want a company that is willing to listen to their ideas without criticizing them. The last bullet, when creativity is necessary, we need to protect core creative people from non-core activities. Those people that demonstrate significant creativity abilities should be assigned to brainstorming sessions on some of these new projects. What must be done? We must allow for mistakes. We must have a high tolerance for ambiguity. Companies must be willing to live with failure. We must find ways to keep project teams focused and engaged. Let me ask you a question. When's the last time somebody went to work on your project and you actually talked to them on a personal basis at the beginning of the project? What we're saying today is work with these people on a personal basis. Find out what their needs are. What are their expectations? Sit down with the people and ask them the following questions. What do you see your role to be on this project? What do you think your responsibilities are going to be? What do you expect your authority to be? What decisions do you expect to make? Do you expect to interface with stakeholders? And do you expect this project, if completed successfully, to impact your career goals? How long does it take to sit down and discuss this with the people on your team right at the beginning when a project starts? The way people answer these questions could give you significant insight on how to work with them. Organizational cultures that survive in the past with strictly command and control are not going to survive in the future. Well-designed organizational cultures today support project management, and it's viewed as an intangible asset. You know what we taught project managers for 50 years? 50 years. We taught project managers, you have to establish a culture on your project that makes it easy for you to work with the people on the project team. But tell me, what happens if that culture that you create is different than the corporate culture? Now what? What happens if the cultures are different? Well, guess what? Executives are now realizing that if project management is going to become a strategic competency from the very first slide I showed you, then the corporate culture and the project management culture must come together. They must come together. First and foremost, team members must be provided with and share the valued objectives and how they're aligned to business strategy. Executives must no longer withhold information about business strategy from project team members. We call this a line of sight. The people on the project team must have a line of sight to strategic objectives. People that work on project teams want safety. They want a non-threatening environment where the team members feel that they can freely participate in discussions and state their opinion. We want a corporate culture where team members understand that the criticism they're getting, if they get criticism, it's constructive criticism. And executives must let people on project teams know that some projects will fail and people will not be punished because they work on a project that failed. What I showed you in the past 56 slides just scratched the surface of what the next generation of project management will look like. A lot of the topics that I discussed will be discussed in some of these upcoming seminars and webinars that IIL will be conducting that you see on the screen here. I welcome you to participate in these. A lot of these will focus on topics that are in the future. I want to thank you all very much for attending this presentation. And at this point, I'll turn it over to Pavel for the remaining 5 or 6 minutes for any questions that you may have. Pavel, over to you.
All right, thank you. That was an awesome presentation, first of all. And second, we have a couple of questions right now. I hope we'll get more. We'll start with the very basic. There's a question about the certificate. Yes, there'll certainly be a certificate that will come in a follow-up email. There's also going to be a follow-up email with their access to the recording. Now, the first question that we have is, when do you think we can expect the first AI PM certifications to be available?
Boy, it's a guess. I wish I could say that. Now, there is AI certification programs already on the marketplace, but it's for business decision making, and it's not necessarily generated for projects. If you go into the internet and you search, you'll probably find them, but a lot of those certification programs have been criticized that they've been introduced into the marketplace too early because of the risks. I believe that companies like IIL and PMI, either independently or jointly, will participate in designing AI project management certifications. The key word here is project management, not just AI certification, but AI project management certification. There are still way too many risks, in my opinion, to introduce this very quickly. Most of the literature that I've read says that this is going to happen significantly within the next 5 years. Whether it happens sooner, I don't know. But my target is probably 2027 or 2028 when you'll see it in full bloom in the marketplace. Next question, please. That's a good question.
We don't seem to have any more questions still, but we have a comment saying, extremely informative presentation. Thank you very much. From
At this point then, if there are questions, Pavel will make sure I get them and I'll respond in writing. At this point, I want to thank all of you for attending this presentation on the next generation of project management, and may all of your projects be successful. Thank you all.